1. The iron shaft of Moses, famously associated with the bronze serpent Nehushtan, stands as a profound historical and physical anchor within Judean cosmology. This rod was not merely a shepherd's staff, but a heavy, forged instrument of direction and terrestrial alignment. In the wilderness, this metallic standard served as a focal point for a wandering people, grounding their physical survival in the elemental properties of earth and ore. The lifting of this shaft in the desert was a literal event that commanded the gaze of thousands, forcing them to look upward toward a centralized axis. This vertical alignment established a tangible connection between the dust of the Sinai and the vast expanse of the firmament above. 2. Embedded within the physical nature of this iron standard is a deeply magnetic parable, rooted in the behavior of lodestones and forged metals in antiquity. Ancient navigators and builders understood the attractive forces of magnetic iron, utilizing its invisible pull to find true north and orient their sanctuaries. Moses, learned in the advanced sciences of the Egyptian and surrounding courts, wielded a standard that symbolically and literally drew the Israelites toward a specific orientation. The magnetic pull of the shaft represents an inescapable directive force, aligning the scattered tribes along a unified vector of historic destiny. It was a compass of leadership, pointing relentlessly toward a promised, yet heavily contested horizon. 3. This magnetic attraction serves as the foundation for the ascending parables recorded in biblical Hebrew texts. When the people were bitten by fiery serpents, the remedy required them to look upon the raised bronze and iron figure, initiating a cognitive and spiritual ascent. The poison of the earth was counteracted by the upward gaze, drawing the mind away from the fatal bites in the dust toward a celestial remedy. This ascending motion is a recurrent literary and historical motif in Judean texts, where salvation is consistently placed on a vertical axis. The heavy iron, despite its physical weight, becomes the instrument of elevation, defying gravity through its magnetic spiritual resonance. 4. However, the interpretation of this ascending rod underwent a massive cultural and literary transformation, reflecting a broader historical conflict between matriarchal origins and patriarchal authority. In the earliest logical understandings of the region, the life-giving, protective forces were distinctly maternal. The wilderness itself was a harsh crucible, but the guidance through it originally carried the nurturing, fiercely protective hallmarks of a mother guiding her children. As the historical narrative was codified by later temple authorities, this maternal guidance was systematically reassigned to a strictly paternal, martial figure of conquest. The rod of iron shifted from a stabilizing, magnetic center of the camp to a weapon of smiting and patriarchal dominance. 5. This transition is vividly captured in the evolution of biblical Hebrew terminology and the curation of the Apocrypha. The ancient name El Shaddai, often translated in later texts through a patriarchal lens, sustaining maternal presence. Similarly, the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit or breath of life, operates as a feminine noun in Hebrew, hovering over the waters of creation like a mother bird. These linguistic artifacts survived the redactions of later centuries, preserving the original matriarchal cosmology within the very grammar of the sacred texts. They reveal a time when the divine order was balanced, if not entirely centered, on the feminine principle of creation. 6. The suppression of this matriarchal cosmology required a deliberate rebranding of the heavens and the earth by the rising patriarchal priesthoods. The historical events of the Exodus and the subsequent conquest of Canaan were recorded by scribes who sought to legitimize a male-dominated, dynastic priesthood. In doing so, they had to overwrite the existing regional maps of power, which were frequently held by female rulers and priestesses in neighboring kingdoms. The Judean literary symbolism was subsequently stripped of its maternal deities, replacing them with a singular, heavily masculinized sovereign who ruled from the sky. The magnetic pull of the original feminine wisdom was thus redirected toward a patriarchal throne. 7. To understand the magnitude of this shift, one must look south to the kingdom of Cush and the powerful lineage of the Kendakes or Candaces. These formidable queens of Meroe ruled with absolute authority, inheriting their power through a deeply entrenched matriarchal system. The Kendakes were not merely political monarchs, they were the chief spiritual authorities, the living embodiments of the mother goddess on earth. Their kingdom represented a continuous, unbroken chain of matriarchal rule that stood in stark contrast to the volatile, patriarchal dynasties of the Mediterranean and Near East. They controlled vast trade routes, commanding armies and building immense architectural wonders that aligned with the stars. 8. The Kendakes possessed advanced cosmological knowledge, mapping the heavens not as a battleground of conquering gods, but as a vast, cyclical womb of time and seasons. Their astronomical maps were meticulously charted to agricultural and human fertility cycles, reflecting a worldview where the earth and sky were intimately, maternally linked. These maps were renowned throughout the ancient world, representing a pinnacle of observational astronomy and mathematics. For the matriarchies of the Nile Valley and beyond, the stars were the illuminated tapestry of a grand, cosmic mother. This maternal map of the firmament offered a profound sense of belonging and cyclical return, rather than linear apocalypse. 9. In the worldview of the Kendakes, the firmament, the great dome of the sky, was the ultimate matriarchal refuge. It was the protective barrier that separated the ordered world from the chaotic waters of the abyss, functioning much like a mother's womb protecting the unborn. The stars were viewed as ancestral fires, the glowing souls of past matriarchs watching over their descendants from the safety of this celestial canopy. This cosmology provided a deep psychological safety net for their civilization, fostering a society based on equity, cyclical renewal, and reverence for the earth. The firmament was not a distant, unapproachable throne room, but an intimate, enclosing embrace. 10. The patriarchal authorities in Judea, and later in broader Greco-Roman spheres, recognized the potent influence of these matriarchal maps. To solidify their own theological and political dominance, a massive historical rebranding effort was undertaken. The firmament, originally the nurturing womb of the Kendakes' cosmology, was systematically redefined in patriarchal texts as a rigid, crystalline structure of absolute law and division. The rakia, the Hebrew word for the firmament, was increasingly described as a hammered-out sheet of metal, a barrier of exclusion rather than an embrace of inclusion. This linguistic and conceptual shift served to distance the divine from the earth, placing the patriarchal authority exclusively above and beyond the physical realm. 11. This rebranding transformed the firmament from a matriarchal refuge into a paternal fortress. The gates of heaven, once open pathways for the cyclical descent of rain and maternal blessings, became guarded checkpoints of judgment and martial authority. The ancient texts were reauthored to ensure that access to this firmament was heavily restricted, mediated only by a male priesthood operating in a highly structured, patriarchal temple system. The expansive, cyclical maps of the Kendakes were buried or marginalized, replaced by linear hierarchical diagrams of spiritual ascent that required absolute submission to patriarchal law. The protective womb was thus hardened into an impenetrable vault. 12. We can see the scars of this transition within the Apocrypha, where the suppressed voices of the matriarchal cosmology continue to echo. Texts like the Book of Enoch and the Wisdom of Solomon contain fragmented, yet powerful, references to a more ancient, feminine cosmic order. Sophia, the personification of divine wisdom, is described as the architect of the universe, a distinctly female force that pervades all things and orders the stars. She is the remnant of the Kendake maps, a localized Judean translation of the great cosmic mother, who was slowly being written out of the canonical historical record. The Apocrypha serves as a literary repository for the displaced matriarchal cosmology. 13. The iron shaft of Moses, when viewed through this historical lens, becomes a site of immense ideological conflict. Originally, the lifting of the serpent on the staff may have been a localized adoption of a much older, matriarchal healing practice, deeply connected to earth energies and the shedding of skin as a symbol of cyclical rebirth. The bronze serpent was a widespread symbol of feminine healing and fertility throughout the ancient Near East. By elevating it on an iron shaft, Moses was utilizing a known ancient technology of spiritual and physical restoration. However, the subsequent patriarchal narrative stripped the serpent of its maternal healing properties, later condemning it as an idol to be destroyed by King Hezekiah. 14. The destruction of Nehushtan by Hezekiah marks a definitive historical moment in the patriarchal rebranding of Judean worship. The bronze serpent, a tangible link to the older, more earth-centered and potentially matriarchal healing practices of the wilderness generation, was smashed to pieces. This act was not merely a religious reform, it was a political consolidation of patriarchal power, eradicating a venerated object that did not fit the new centralized martial theology of the Jerusalem temple. The magnetic, ascending parable of the iron shaft was thus severed from its original physical anchor, replaced entirely by the abstract, textual authority of the male priesthood. 15. Deciphering the ascending parables requires us to reverse this erasure and reconstruct the original magnetic alignment. When the individual is called to look upward, the original destination was not a throne of judgment, but the maternal canopy of the firmament. The ascent is a return to the womb of creation, a realignment with the cyclical laws of nature that the Kendake so accurately mapped. The iron shaft acts as the needle of a compass, pointing not to a conqueror in the sky, but to the enduring protective embrace of the matriarchal cosmos. The true north of this ancient navigation system was the mother of all living. 16. The magnetic nature of this parable extends to the very concept of historical memory and literary preservation. Just as iron retains its magnetic charge, the biblical Hebrew language retained the linguistic charge.
It was said magnetic parables decoded, deciphered to the firmament. Matriarchs rising.